when you don't have your starting quarterback for the entire season, you're probably not going to make the playoffs. And the Colts finished with a 4-12 record with Jacoby Brissett under center for 15 of those games. Now, there is some upside to the Indianapolis Colts, and that upside is what I mentioned, Jacoby Brissett. And when it comes to Brissett and all that, they traded for him before the season started. They traded away their draft bust in Philip Dorsett, and it looks like they found themselves a franchise backup quarterback. Obviously not as big as like franchise quarterback, but they already had one in Andrew Luck. And the one thing about Jacoby Brissett is you could trade away this guy for a draft pick in the future or something like that. So you could get some value out of this guy. Or maybe you could trade him for a player and maybe get an offensive lineman or a defensive player. You name it. But when you look at the Colts, obviously their high point of the season was Jacoby Brissett. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, sure, they had a pretty cool game against the Bills and whatnot. But obviously it just wasn't that big of a deal. Besides that, it was just snowing out there and just looked cool that it was just snowing out there. Yeah, that's the Colts for you. And that's what you get for not having a starting quarterback. And then they had Chuck Pagano. I've never really been a big Chuck Pagano fan. I mean, the reason why he still had his job was partially because he had cancer. And Bruce Arians was the Colts OC, and he was actually their coach for the entire, or for the majority of the 2012 season. And he's partially the reason why Andrew Luck looked good out there. And if you look at that, Chuck Pagano obviously eventually took helm, and that was Chuck Pagano supposed to be his first year. His real first year was probably 2013. But when it came to that, Bruce Arians was the better coach, and obviously Bruce Arians just retired. And then when you look at Pagano out there, Pagano obviously was never really that great of a coach. I've never been a big fan of him. Never really liked his style of game plan and whatnot. And for a defensive-minded coach, he really couldn't really get that Colts defense to play and whatnot. So it's about time he got out there. So now Pagano's out there. And it looks like there's going to be some optimism with the Colts in the future because they simply just have Andrew Luck there. And then, sure, they got a backup quarterback, Brissett. But the one thing is, if you're going to win games with Brissett, you're going to need talent around your roster. It was pretty self-evident when you look at the talent around the roster. They cut Vontae Davis because he couldn't really play no more. And so they had that new corner out there. They had that Moore guy who didn't look half bad, but they just still need some talent there. Now they got Jabal Shear for a pass rusher. I'm not sure how long Jabal Shear's going to be there for, but he ain't Dwight Free, he ain't Robert Mathis, and they're probably going to be looking for that. Same way how they built the 2006 Colts and the 2009 Colts and all. But they do got some pieces there. I mean, Malik Hooker looks like he's going to be something. Obviously, it's his rookie year. It's a young year. I mean, he can develop into something. He can. And then, obviously, their run D has been terrible. It has been terrible since they won the Super Bowl back in 2006. It always has been terrible. And I think that's definitely one thing. The defense is just simply not complete. But one thing I think, the quickest way for the Colts to get into the playoffs is simply the build-up on the offense. And it's pretty self-evident that their offense is T.Y. Hilton, who's a good wide receiver, maybe a top 10 receiver. And then you got Jack Doyle, who's a decent tight end. But let's look at the Colts back in 2006. Let's see what they had on their roster. Marvin Harrison, Hall of Famer. Reggie Wayne was obviously a quality receiver. Dallas Clark was a quality receiver. And Joseph Dye was a 1,000-yard rusher who can also catch the ball. And when you look at the Colts, obviously you have the old man and Frank Gore out there. And when it came to him, yeah, he did produce. They also had T.Y. Hilton, obviously, but they didn't have that second receiver. And I'm not huge on Jack Doyle. Also, the Colts had a little bit better of an offensive line and whatnot. And I would say, yeah, Tony Dungy is a big upgrade from Chuck Pagano. So, obviously, yeah, that's why the Colts are 4-12 right now. So, to put this all in perspective, when I look at the Colts, it was an interesting season with how Frank Gore took control. They still hand off the ball to him a ton, even at his old age. That's why I don't really get about it. Just holding up to a role running back. He could still do it somewhat and all of that. And Frank Gore is probably one of the most underrated running backs in NFL history, in my mind. And obviously, he was still able to play and all that. But in the spite of some of these heroic efforts by Brissett and Frank Gore, they still finished the season with a third straight year without football in January.